There are many reasons why organizations invest in open source technologies: lower cost, less vendor lock-in, improved development velocity, and a lot more. But what is the number one reason organizations use open source? Access to innovation. Learn more on this episode of Future Proof.
The future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed. Yet. Today's world teems with innovation. The nexus of hardware, software, and human ingenuity promises a revolution in possibilities. What does tomorrow look like? Witness Future Proof.
Host here, Eric Cavanaugh, and I'm so excited for today's show, folks. We're going to talk about a topic near and dear to my heart. It has been, honestly, for about 17 years now. I've been studying what's called open source software. We've got two great guests lined up for you today. We've got Javier Perez of Perforce and Stefano Mafuli of the Open Source Initiative, dialing all the way in from Italy. So ciao, grazie. Ciao, bello. Grazie.
Thank you.
Or good night, I should say. Yes. So these gentlemen are both really steeped in the open source community, folks. And we're going to talk about the 77-page report that has just been released. It's really a humdinger, and it goes into the open source trend in this survey to figure out what is the state of open source. And there are a number of really big drivers, one of which, of course, is access to innovation. And this one really struck me as very significant because the number one driver, when asked, why are you using open source technology? They said access to innovation. What does that mean? It means the innovation is happening in the open source community. Now, 20 odd years ago, it was all about Linux, the operating system. Now Linux is everywhere. It's a default for the enterprise for operating systems. So they've kind of won that game, but it's been climbing up the stack too in the data space. We went through the whole Hadoop era, of course, and a lot was learned about distributed computing. But these days it's all over the map. There are open source initiatives in lots of different spaces of the industry, and we're going to learn about that from our two guests. So Javier Perez, I'll bring you in first from Perforce. And Javier, you and I have talked before about open source and really how it has fundamentally changed how enterprise software is conceived, designed, programmed, deployed, managed over time. It's a really big deal. It's a much different world now than it was even 10 years ago, let alone 20 years ago. But maybe tell me your thoughts, Javier, on this report. It is the State of Open Source 2022 by Perforce and the Open Source Initiative. Javier, what are your thoughts about what struck you?
Yeah, no, a lot of great results. It took us some time to put it together. We started with a very complete survey, and thanks to Stefano and the OSI organization, we were able to kind of reach out to a very large audience. It was a global survey. We received more than 2,600 responses from all over the world, every single region covered, and really what we were asking was about the use of open source software in organizations, right? We know that obviously there are many developers going and using open source libraries, open source programming languages, but we wanted to know more about what's happening in organizations all over the world. And that included, small, medium, and large organizations across all the top industries. I think we counted top 20 verticals or industries, right? So from technology to telecom to financial services and
retail,
healthcare, everything, right? So we felt really good about the content on the survey. We felt really good about the audience that we reached on their responses, and it was great to see. And you mentioned it, Eric. It was great to see that the number one reason to use open source software in organizations today is access to innovation, access to the latest technologies. And that's what is happening in the open source space. The power of many, right? Many contributing and innovating.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there's this other thread that goes right along with that of the so-called Great Resignation. We keep hearing about that day after day. hundreds of thousands of people, millions even, just resigning from their positions, walking away from old jobs. Maybe some of them were service industry, maybe some of them were tourism industry, travel, who knows? People are walking away from their old jobs. And what are they doing? Well, some people are I guess, settled and they're fine and they don't have to make money to get by. But for the rest of us who are out there, well, guess what? If you are working with the most innovative technologies, you are going to attract the top talent. And that's what you need in this industry to survive. We live in a digital economy now, and the companies that can harness the infrastructure, can harness the data in particular, and there are lots of different technologies that go into that. We were talking about Puppet before the show, in fact, and there's a big announcement coming from Force on that, I do believe. But nonetheless, all of these different open source projects, like Hadoop was, of course, Kubernetes is on the compute side. But on the data side, if you can leverage your data, you are going to be able to analyze that data and make better decisions for your business. And that's really where open source is taking off. What do you think, Javier?
Yeah, I mean, just do a search. People are looking for open source skills, right? Mm-hmm. And that was one of the other findings on the State of Open Source report. One of the big reasons for everyone is using open source, right? But one of the reasons not to adopt more open source or use more open source is the lack of skills and experience and proficiency, right? Mm-hmm. For large organizations, they might have the personnel but not the skills or not the experience. So yeah, talking about the Great Resignation, there are many jobs out there for people with open source skills, and talking about across all the technology stacks. It could be data technologies, it could be DevOps tooling, it could be AI, machine learning, deep learning. So very, very interesting, the fact that we're at a time where it's all about open source, all about those skills, because people want, or organizations want to keep innovating. Actually, let's tell you, another question we asked towards the end of the survey was, what is more desirable technologies that you would like to start working on? And pretty much everyone selected everything. They want to do everything. They want to do machine learning. They want to do crypto, blockchain, everything. So there's really a good momentum here in terms of open source software, and there's strategies around that, right? So we can talk more about it.
I love it. I love it. And Stefano, I'm going to do it again. Stefano Maffulli. I'm looking at this report, and there's one line early in it's on page, what? It's like in the first 10 pages or so. And it's use of open source software. Has your organization increased the use of open source software over the last year? 77% said yes. Only 21% said it's the same, and a measly 1.63% said less. I think they were just being smarty pants or something. That's a huge number. 77% are increasing. That's a huge indicator, right, Stefano?
It's a huge indicator of a success. It's something that started over 20 years ago as a movement, and it's been growing ever since. We have imagined a world over 20 years ago where the users had the power, they were granted rights and freedoms to shape the technology, and it's actually happening. We encoded those rights into the open source definition, which is the standard that we maintain as for the community from the open source initiative. And that has served the community for over 2 decades and has created a huge ecosystem. At this stage, it's very clear that the movement, as you were saying, as we imagine, it is actually happening. It's out there.
Yeah, it's amazing. And, I remember 20 years ago, open source was viewed as sort of a hobby, or, oh, why are you wasting time on that? Are you just bored? And now, as we've discussed, it is the standard. It's certainly for the operating system. Climbing up the stack, you look at the most innovative solutions that are rolling out right now, and the vast majority of them either started open source or are now still completely open source. I think things like Kubernetes, for example, which, folks, if you aren't familiar with Kubernetes, it's a project that came out of Google. It's distributed compute, basically. So it's a containerization technology. It containerizes the functions that your computers do. And then the way it works is you just dynamically spin up these ephemeral containers. They do their little job and they go away. And it's incredibly powerful for scaling out and then scaling back down, basically. Kubernetes is wonderful stuff. And then, of course, in artificial intelligence, which guess what, is another one of the top reasons why people are looking at open source for AI and ML frameworks, right, Stefano?
Absolutely. Now, AI and ML frameworks are now default distributed and created as open source with the algorithms as open source code. And there is a lot of innovation happening on that front. There is lots of new thinking. There is also some challenges on that front. Like we are about to announce a new program and a series of events to dive a little bit deeper into what does that mean? What does it mean for a system that can predict the behavior of a person outside of jail? For that, for example, what does it really mean? What should we ask as a society to be able to inspect, for example, to check that software is actually doing the right thing and not discriminating, for example? Or if you think about something more common, like driving a car, an automatic driver, riding along yourself. You drive your own car, and then this robot as a taxi next to you. Like what's happening actually in that car? How can we make sure that it's programmed not to hurt you and save the driver instead, for example? Like there are lots of interesting nuances behind the machine learning specifically and how it intersects with the open source as a collaboration framework.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We do have a question from one of our live audience members. And folks, if you want to be part of the live studio audience for these shows, just send me an email, info@insideanalysis.com, or sign up. All of our webinars are recorded via Zoom. And the question is, can you recommend some machine learning frameworks? Maybe, Stefano, I'll throw it over to you first, and then Javier, what do you think?
Well, the highest amount of innovation around is happening in Python, in the Python ecosystem. So PyTorch, NumPy, they have a lot of components, lots of libraries where you can start and getting your feet wet with algorithms. Of course, TensorFlow is another project that is still, it was released by Google. Lots of research going on there, lots of stuff that is actually at the forefront of innovation happening.
Yeah, that's good stuff, Javier. Go ahead, Javier.
I was going to say that OSI and OpenLogic by Perforce, we are completely vendor neutral, right? We are completely agnostic here. We're not in the business of recommending, but we do talk about the technologies. And yeah, I mean, PyTorch and TensorFlow are the two leaders in terms of machine learning development. Interesting. One it started with Google. The other one started with Facebook, right? Which is the other reality on open source. Large organizations, not only tech organizations, by the way, including banks and across all industries, they're working in open source, they contribute back, and that makes those projects to grow, right? So there are two leaders, PyTorch and TensorFlow. And then there are a bunch of libraries, utilities, most of them Python that Stefano was mentioning. So yeah, I mean, definitely so much to learn about. And the great thing is, again, all the building blocks are open source software. And then, everyone is building their own apps, their own technologies based on that.
Our guests, Stefano Maffulli from the Open Source Initiative and Javier Perez of Perforce. It's actually OpenLogic by Perforce, a company doing a lot of great work in the open source space. And let's get back to our report here. We've got the State of Open Source report that the folks at Perforce and the Open Source Initiative have put out. Big survey, lots of really interesting information here. And we'll get to the challenges in a moment, but artificial intelligence, this is one of the key drivers for OS frameworks, for understanding how to set up the systems to crunch the numbers, basically. And just for the benefit of our audience, AI can do a lot of different things. Of course, natural language processing is very sophisticated these days, but half the people who use Siri would say it's not yet sophisticated enough yet. because Siri still doesn't quite understand what you're asking sometimes, but it's getting pretty good, I have to say. And you have natural language processing in all of these transcripts that are being done now. You've got machines that are transcribing whole interviews. And of course, humans still go through it and kind of pick through that. It's also good for things like next best offer. When you go to Amazon, it's recommending things to you. A lot of that is machine learning. A lot of that is even traditional analytics, just noticing who bought what and then mapping that to the user's behavior in real time. But there are lots of interesting use cases for AI, but there is this issue around explainability, meaning if the AI is doing something important, like determining whether someone should get a loan, for example, or in healthcare, I don't think it's quite there yet, but it will be in terms of recommending a course of action to treat a certain patient, for example. Well, you need to be able to explain what that algorithm did. And this stuff gets really dense sometimes. But Stefano, I'll throw it over to you to comment on explainability as one of the key facets of AI to understand.
Right. Yeah, things got really complex very quickly. Because I remember the very first system that I used, natural language processing, was configuring Spam Assassin. It's an open source project that learns from emails whether they are good and they're called ham, or they're unwanted, unnecessary, and they're spam. You install it very easily. It's created by the Apache Software Foundation, and it's free and open source software. You download it, you put it on your systems, and you feed it a corpus of emails that are good and a corpus of emails that is bad, and that will learn, right? Very simple tool, and it's very easy to me to understand where the software is, the license it has, and the trained model. Once you have fed your own emails, what's happening in there. Things start become a little bit more complex when you start thinking about, like you were saying, the systems that deny jail, or the systems that are out there now that create art based on text. Or you describe an image. I want a picture of a sunset, and the virtual artist will create the picture for you. So that has the potential to put out a lot of people out of business. A lot of illustrators, graphic designers, and these machines, I don't know how they work. And many times I'm starting to understand them better, to study them a little bit more and talk to experts. They are black boxes. No human really understands what happens after you fed images to an AI machine that trains a model. That model cannot be inspected. And that creates a little bit of problems, including the fact that open source is about collaboration. How do you collaborate on improving a model that you do not understand?
Yeah, it's a real challenge, and that's a job opportunity out there, Javier. I'll throw it over to you. If you're listening to this, folks, and you're looking for a new job to get into, man, look into AI, in part because you can learn so much online for free. A lot of these algorithms are available for free to use, for example. You do need your data. You do need to know how to install, how to run the algorithm, so to speak. But if you want to get into a space that is white hot and will never not be hot, I would recommend AI, and in particular, the open source side of that. But Javier, what do you think?
Yeah, even data sets are available. There are a lot of companies. I know companies like Google and IBM, they've made available. It's actually an open source, an open license to consume those data sets to train their models. Can I just stop and say to everyone that is new to AI, machine learning, that you have nothing to worry about. Like, machines are not going to take over anytime soon, okay? And we're 100 years or more to something even close to that to happen, right? We do have a lot of innovation. We do have in many of the transactional activities, things that is just repetitive, right? Things that are based on transactions. Those are ideal, and those are the use cases that we see today. The example that Steph was just telling us, it's about reading, it's about understanding things. Those are the use cases that we have today, obviously also around analytics and pattern recognition, image recognition, right? So there are some great use cases in the medical space where machine learning, actually deep learning algorithms are recognizing X-ray images, right?
Right.
So they go and read, compare against thousands or even millions of images, So in just seconds can recommend the doctor on what's going on or what's wrong, just comparing against other thousands or millions of images, right? So fantastic for those examples. And there's so many areas, right? So if anyone that is interested on coding, computer science, and then moving to AI or security, those are the two hot markets. It's all open source, by the way, but it's from security or cybersecurity and AI. Those are great spaces for people to get into that. There's going to be plenty. I mean, there are already plenty of jobs.
They're everywhere. And what's cool is that they're fun and interesting jobs, folks. And you don't have to be a programmer either to get into AI. There are lots of jobs that will be around the business liaison, for example, to the team that deploys the technology. That's a very important team, no doubt about it. But there will be jobs in terms of understanding the use cases, in terms of working with the teams to better figure out how to apply these technologies. But when you get right down to it, they do pretty simple things, like Javier was saying, classification, ranking, for example. What's the likelihood of this sale to close? I've seen some really fascinating technologies out there using some of these tools, and it's quite remarkable. There's one company I know of that for your sales teams, instead of letting the salespeople decide who to ping next and what to do all day, no, this engine will serve up to them the next person they should call based upon what's happening in real time. So let's say a company like GE shows up on your website and 5 different people are browsing around for products on artificial intelligence. Well, if you know that, if you can identify that happening, well, guess what? Then this system will tell your salesperson to call the guy from GE next because you know that it's hot. And so these kinds of situational awareness use cases are very, very compelling. And it's the kind of stuff that humans would not be able to do without assistance. You must have some form of automation or maybe AI under the covers to be able to hack through that amount of data in such a short period of time. But Stefano, I'll throw it over to you. That's where these computing frameworks, especially in the cloud, can be so powerful because you can just rent the compute. It's your own data, for example, in a particular use case. So it takes some time to get the models set up and to manage them. But once they're running, you get lift. That's what you're talking about. You want to get lift. You want to get a greater conversion rate based upon the algorithms. And then you track that to make sure if it's working, right, Stefano?
That's the problem. With my previous hat as a digital marketing manager, it's a big promise. It's a big promise. It has implications, right? You have now putting back my civil society type of representative. I also think about the creepy aspect of it. And being a European, I'm also quite concerned about the different approaches that European Union has towards approaches like that are quite invasive. But in general, yeah, I mean, there is huge potential for AI to open up new ways of doing business and transforming the old ways too.
Yeah, that's right. Now, Javier, I'll throw it over to you. I mean, this is a sea change that we're undergoing right now. And the big concern for a lot of folks is, oh my gosh, how do I get that done? Do I have the resources in-house? And usually you do have resources in-house. There are people like DBAs, IT managers, other folks who are already working for you. And these are the folks who should be training now to learn about some of these technologies. And I'll get back to this report here from the 2022 State of Open Source report that you folks put together. What are the main support challenges on your open source software infrastructure? 50% say installation, upgrades, and configuration. It's just getting the stuff loaded, configured, and running. That's what concerns people. And of course, that's what Perforce does, right, Javier?
Yeah, so very interesting because we ask that question. We ask specifically, what are the support challenges with your open source technology, right? And we ask the same question across the different technologies. We ask the same question for Linux and containers, and then for data technologies and DevOps tooling and programming languages. And we consistently got top 3 reasons or top 3 open source support challenges. As you mentioned, installation, upgrades, and configuration issues. Now, you can argue, well, that's for all software, right? Or even hardware, right? You know, I need help. It's challenging to install, configure, get it right. The other one was keeping up with updates and patches. And that's, depending on the technology, that was number 1 in some of the technologies. And that's the whole concept of open source keeps moving, right? So you keep updating open source. Every time there's a known, or especially if it's a high severity vulnerability, well, there's already looking for the patch, there's already the fix provided there, and it tells you, well, update to the next release, so that vulnerability is fixed. Keeping up with updates and patches, very high on the support challenges for organizations, right? And then the third piece, the third kind of major challenge was, again, the mention of personal experience and proficiency. While you might select a specific technology based on the personnel you have, and say, well, if I already have a few experts on Hadoop, or have already a few experts on Spark, we're going to continue to use that. Well, that still becomes one of the number one support challenges, right? Or you lose. We were talking about the resignations. You lose the expert there, and then you need help with that. So very interesting to see. Those are the support challenges, but it's that doesn't stop organizations to keep using open source.
Yeah, no, that's right. And there are so many projects these days. And to help folks understand, what's really cool about open source is that you have these projects, and then lots of folks will commit to the project. They're called committers. And these are coders who sit around and build certain parts of the technology. And then they commit that back to the group and to the project itself. And there are so many projects. You got the Apache Software Foundation, you got the Linux Foundation, CI/CD is something they're working on, continuous integration, continuous development. And I'm just looking at, in part of the survey, you asked which technologies, select all that apply, does your organization use to build applications today? And look at this list: jQuery, 31%, React is everywhere these days, 27% Angular, 26% .NET Framework, 24%. I mean, this is the information economy, and we have all these open source technologies, and they allow you to build for the future. I think that's one of the key aspects here. And Stefano, I'll throw it over to you. With open source, many eyes make few the errors. And also, we're all collectively building the foundation higher and higher, which allows companies to really focus on what makes them special. It allows them to build out the applications that are going to make their customers happy. And those are typically fairly bespoke, right? When you get right down to where rubber meets road, for any business, there are going to be nuances, and you're not going to have an easy time finding off-the-shelf software to do that stuff very well. But the key is that this stuff is bulletproof and it scales. So scalability is always an issue. If you use a traditional IT stack and you get a huge spike in business, you may have some problems. You may have slow systems, you may upset your customers, etc. One of the key aspects of open source is stability, especially at scale. But Stefano, what do you think about that?
It's all thanks to the big power of collaboration. When big companies, small companies, they all have the same problem. They had the same problem at the beginning, was having an operating system. And then once that was solved, then they started moving up. You were describing it very clearly. Now the collaboration is happening at higher levels of the stack, where nobody's really dreaming about building a framework for user interfaces or applications, mobile applications. They all work on the same components. They have learned also that legally, thanks to the open source definition and to the work of the open source initiative that selects the copyright licenses that actually carry those values, developers have a very easy way of understanding whether they can use React.js in their own application and in their own mobile app. They know that they have rights. They download the software, they modify it, they fix it, they ship their own products.
Well, folks, look these guys up online. Go to perforce.com, just like it sounds. It's the 2022 State of Open Source report, all about open source usage, market trends, and analysis. It's a report you don't want to miss.